the day my sister tried to erase me from our parents. Legacy is etched into my memory with a clarity I never asked for. It began like so many family gatherings before it, in a room filled with familiar faces and polite conversations that carried the weight of unspoken expectations. We were all there because we had been told it was time to formally address what came next after our parents were gone. I had walked into that room believing that, despite our differences, we shared at least one thing: respect for the life our parents had built and the sacrifices they had made for all of us. When my sister stood up and announced that my name had been removed from the will, the air seemed to leave the room all at once. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed, as if this moment had been planned carefully and repeated in her mind many times before being delivered aloud. I could feel eyes turning toward me, some wide with disbelief, others already heavy with sympathy. In that instant, I understood that she had not only questioned my place in the inheritance, but had also dismissed years of devotion I had given to our family and everything our parents stood for. What hurt most was not the money or the assets being discussed, but the assumption behind her words. She spoke as if my presence in our parents' lives had been insignificant, as though the countless days I spent helping them, supporting their business, and standing beside them in their final years had somehow vanished from memory. Sitting there, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal mixed with a strange calm. I realized that reacting emotionally would only serve the story she was trying to write about me. The silence that followed her declaration was heavy and uncomfortable. No one knew how to respond, and that uncertainty filled the space between us like a fog. I felt the weight of judgment in the room, not because people doubted my character, but because they did not know which version of the truth they were supposed to believe. My sister's confidence suggested she had control of the narrative, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the past could be rewritten simply by speaking loudly enough. In that moment, I understood that legacy is about more than legal documents or signatures on a page. It is about presence, consistency, and the quiet work that often goes unnoticed. Our parents had taught us through their actions that what we build with care and integrity cannot be erased by convenience or greed. Remembering that helped me remain composed, even as my sister attempted to strip me of my place in the story of our family. As the room waited for my reaction, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. This was not just about being included or excluded from a will. It was about defending the truth of what had been lived and shared over decades. I had been there when others were absent. I had carried responsibility when it was heavy and inconvenient. Those experiences had shaped me, and no announcement could undo them. The attempt to erase me revealed more about my sister's intentions than it did about my worth. Her actions exposed a willingness to distort reality for personal gain, even if it meant breaking trust and damaging family bonds. That realization was painful, but it was also freeing. It showed me that my value was not something she had the power to define or take away. By the end of that day, I understood that legacies are not erased in a single moment, no matter how dramatic. They live on in the choices we make, the values we protect, and the truth we are willing to stand for when it matters most. What my sister tried to take from me could never truly be removed, because it was rooted in years of love, commitment, and loyalty that no document could deny. The organic store that became my life did not begin as a polished brand or a carefully calculated business plan. It started as an idea shaped by my parents' belief that food should be honest, nourishing, and rooted in respect for the people who grow it. Long before organic labels were common or fashionable, they trusted their instincts and poured their savings, time, and energy into a small store that reflected their values. I grew up watching that vision take form, learning early that building something meaningful required patience, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to doing things the right way. As a child, the store felt like an extension of our home. I spent weekends wandering between aisles, helping stock shelves, and listening to conversations with farmers who delivered fresh produce straight from their fields. My parents treated every supplier like a partner, not just a transaction, and they taught me that relationships mattered as much as profit. I learned how to tell when fruit was ripe, how to spot quality in grains and oils, and why supporting local growers strengthened not just our business, but our entire community. Those lessons stayed with me, shaping how I saw the world and my place in it. As I grew older, my role in the store deepened naturally. After school, I helped customers find what they needed, explained why certain products cost more, and listened to their stories about how changing their diet had improved their lives. The work was demanding, but it felt purposeful. Each small task contributed to something larger, something built on trust. While others saw a shop, I saw the result of countless early mornings, late nights, and decisions made with integrity rather than convenience. When my parents began to slow down, the store did not feel like a burden handed to me. It felt like a responsibility I was honored to carry. I stepped in where they needed help, managing inventory, training staff, and keeping operations running smoothly. Over time, that single store grew into multiple locations, each one expanding the reach of what my parents had started without losing its original heart. Growth was careful and intentional, never rushed, always guided by the same principles that shaped the first day we opened our doors. The store became more than my workplace. It became my identity, woven into the rhythm of my days and the decisions I made about the future. I celebrated milestones there and endured losses within its familiar walls. Customers returned week after week, not just for the products, but for the sense of connection and care they felt. Seeing families trust us with their health and well-being reinforced why this work mattered so deeply to me. Through challenges and changes in the market, I remained committed to preserving what made the store special. Trends came and went, but I focused on consistency and quality, believing that long-term trust was worth more than short-term gains. Every improvement I introduced was measured against one simple question: would my parents be proud of this choice? That question guided me through difficult moments and reminded me of the responsibility I carried. What began as a modest storefront became the foundation of my life, shaping my values, my work ethic, and my understanding of success. Built from the ground up, the store stands as proof that when something is created with care and sustained with dedication, it becomes more than a business. It becomes a living legacy, one that grows through love, effort, and an unbreakable bond between purpose and P. Our severance, greed behind closed doors, has a way of revealing itself quietly at first, slipping into conversations disguised as concern or practicality. When it comes from family, it cuts deeper because it arrives wrapped in shared history and familiar faces. The shift is subtle, almost unnoticeable, until one day, the warmth that once defined those relationships is replaced by suspicion and calculation. What once felt like mutual support slowly turns into a battleground where trust becomes collateral damage. In my case, the change did not happen overnight. It began with questions that felt unnecessary, comments that hinted at dissatisfaction, and an increasing focus on numbers rather than people. Private discussions started happening without me. Decisions were suggested rather than shared, and the tone of communication grew sharper. Behind closed doors, plans were being formed that excluded not just my voice, but the values our family had once agreed mattered most. It was unsettling to realize that the same bonds that had held us together were now being used as leverage. Family opposition driven by greed is particularly painful because it challenges your sense of belonging. These are the people who know your history, your sacrifices, and your vulnerabilities. When they turn against you, it feels less like a disagreement and more like a betrayal of everything you believed was unspoken and understood. The conflict stops being about outcomes and starts being about control, about who gets to decide what matters and whose contributions are deemed valuable. The most difficult part was recognizing that the opposition was not rooted in misunderstanding, but in intention. Greed reframed the narrative, turning years of shared effort into something transactional. Achievements were minimized, and dedication was treated as a given rather than something earned. Closed-door meetings became spaces where plans were reshaped to benefit one side, while presenting those changes as reasonable or inevitable. It was a slow erosion of honesty that left little room for genuine dialogue. As the pressure increased, I found myself forced into a position I never wanted, defending what should never have needed defense. Protecting the truth became a daily effort, not through confrontation, but through quiet vigilance. I learned to listen carefully, document everything, and trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Greed thrives in secrecy, and understanding that helped me remain grounded even when family dynamics grew hostile. The emotional toll of facing opposition from within your own family is heavy. There is grief for what once was, anger at what is unfolding, and confusion about how things reach this point. You begin to question whether loyalty still holds value or if it has been replaced entirely by self-interest. In moments like these, clarity comes from recognizing that opposition does not always mean you are wrong. Sometimes it means you are standing in the way of someone else's agenda. Over time, the experience taught me a hard but necessary lesson. Family ties do not automatically protect against greed, and shared blood does not guarantee shared values. When ambition crosses into exploitation, opposition becomes inevitable. Accepting that truth was painful, but it allowed me to stop seeking validation from those who had already chosen their path. In the end, facing greed behind closed doors strengthened my resolve. It forced me to define my boundaries and reaffirm what I was willing to protect, even if it meant standing alone. When family turns into opposition, the loss is profound, but so is the growth that comes from refusing to compromise your integrity. What remains after that struggle is a clearer understanding of who you are and what truly matters, untouched by the schemes that once tried to undermine it. The phone call that changed everything in the conference room began in a moment of heavy silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes time feel stretched. Papers lay scattered across the long table, and faces around me carried expressions of pity, discomfort, and quiet curiosity. The air was thick with assumptions that the story had already been decided, that the outcome was settled before I had spoken a single word. In that stillness, I felt the weight of being underestimated, not just as a family member, but as someone whose years of dedication were being quietly dismissed. I reached for my phone without urgency, aware that every small movement was being watched. The calm I felt surprised even me. It was not confidence born from arrogance, but from preparation and patience. As the device connected and I placed it on speaker, the room seemed to hold its breath. The sound of a clear, steady voice on the other end cut through the tension, immediately shifting the balance of power in ways no raised voice or emotional plea ever could. As the words unfolded, the atmosphere in the room transformed. What had moments earlier felt like a verdict became a revelation. Faces that had been fixed in sympathetic glances now leaned forward with focus, listening carefully as facts replaced speculation. The authority of the voice on the line brought clarity where confusion had been planted, and truth began to settle in, steady and undeniable. Each sentence stripped away the narrative that had been carefully constructed against me. The confidence my opposition had displayed moments before wavered, replaced by visible unease. The room, once aligned against me through silence, became a space of reconsideration. Murmurs rippled softly as people processed what they were hearing, realizing that the situation was far more complex than they had been led to believe. What struck me most was how quickly perception shifted when truth entered the room. Sympathy gave way to respect, and doubt was replaced by understanding. The phone call did not raise its voice or dramatize the moment. It simply stated what was real. That simplicity carried more weight than any emotional defense ever could. It reminded everyone present that preparation and honesty are powerful forces, especially when confronted with manipulation. As the call continued, tension gave way to clarity. The expressions around the table told their own story. Some looked relieved, others embarrassed, and a few openly stunned. The assumptions that had quietly judged me unraveled in real time. It became clear that silence is only powerful when it hides the truth. But once truth speaks, silence loses its grip. When the call finally ended, the conference room no longer felt hostile. It felt exposed. The plans that had relied on secrecy and confidence alone could not survive daylight. What had been intended as a public dismissal turned into a moment of accountability. not through confrontation, but through calm precision. The shift was so complete that it felt as though the room itself had exhaled. That single phone call taught me that change does not always come through force or argument. Sometimes it arrives through quiet certainty and the courage to wait for the right moment. In a space where my voice had been expected to shake or break, it was steadiness that carried the day. The conference room, once poised to witness my defeat, instead became the place where truth reclaimed its place, proving that preparation can turn even the most intimidating moment into a turning point that changes everything. Winning the inheritance battle was never about claiming victory over another person. It was about protecting the truth of who my parents were and what they wanted their life's work to become. When the legal fight began, it felt less like a dispute over assets and more like a test of whether integrity could withstand pressure. Manipulation and greed. Every document, every hearing, and every waiting period carried the weight of knowing that my parents' voices could no longer speak for themselves. That responsibility rested heavily on me. The process was exhausting in ways that went far beyond paperwork. It demanded patience, emotional restraint, and a steady belief that truth, even when challenged, has a way of standing firm. Each step forward came with delays, objections, and attempts to rewrite history. Accusations were made that questioned my motives and my relationship with my parents, forcing me to confront the painful reality that someone so close was willing to distort years of lived experience for personal gain. Remaining composed through that storm became its own quiet battle. Throughout the proceedings, I held onto the knowledge that my parents had been thoughtful and deliberate in their decisions. Their wishes were not rushed or influenced. They were shaped over years of trust, observation, and shared effort. Remembering that gave me strength when the process felt endless. I was not fighting for myself alone, but for the clarity and intention behind choices they had made with care. That understanding grounded me when emotions threatened to take over. As evidence was reviewed and timelines examined, the truth began to emerge with unmistakable clarity. Records aligned, testimonies supported one another, and the narrative that had been built against me started to unravel. It became clear that this was not a matter of interpretation, but of facts that spoke for themselves. Watching that happen was both relieving and heartbreaking. Relieving because justice was taking shape, and heartbreaking because it had required exposing deep fractures within the family. The moment the decision was finalized carried a quiet weight rather than triumph. There was no sense of celebration, only a profound release of tension that had built over months of uncertainty. The ruling affirmed what I had always known, that my parents' wishes were clear, valid, and deserving of respect. In that confirmation, I felt closer to them than I had since they passed, as if their intentions had finally been heard again. Protecting their true wishes meant more than securing legal authority. It meant honoring the values they lived by and ensuring their legacy continued with the same care they had poured into it. The outcome allowed me to move forward with clarity, free from the shadow of doubt that had hovered for so long. It gave me the freedom to focus on nurturing what they built, rather than defending it. The experience reshaped my understanding of family and loyalty. It taught me that standing up for what is right sometimes requires enduring isolation and misunderstanding. Yet, it also revealed the quiet strength that comes from staying aligned with truth, even when it is challenged. Winning the battle was not about defeating someone else. It was about refusing to let distortion replace honesty. In the end, protecting my parents' true wishes became an act of love and respect. It ensured that their legacy remained intact, not just on paper, but in practice and principle. While the process left scars, it also reinforced a powerful truth. When integrity guides your actions, no amount of opposition can erase what was built with intention, care, and unwavering values.